Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Maoist Third Worldist Collective. First of all, I wanted to wish all of you out there who celebrate Christmas a Merry Christmas. Um, I don't, because not because I dislike Christmas. I was, in fact, invited to a Christmas luncheon, which was really nice at my neighbor's place. I was very grateful that he invited me. It was literally the first Christmas luncheon I have ever attended. I think I've been to a Christmas dinner once before, but that was many years ago. So I'm happy that I went to a Christmas luncheon. I don't have a Christmas tree per se. I do have something like a Christmas tree. I think it was intended as such by the person whom I bought this condo from. It's a tiny tree that is in the master bedroom, and I have it decorated with other types of things, so it doesn't really look like a Christmas tree. But it is, at least I think, in intention, a Christmas tree. So, although I don't celebrate Christmas, I do have a relic. I guess a relic would be a good term of Christmas in the room where I sleep. Um, but the luncheon was very nice. Got to meet one new person, uh, my neighbor's son's girlfriend, who is from right here in the Rio Grande Valley, a very nice person as well. We had a really nice conversation. And so, again, Merry Christmas to all of you, even though it's not my background. My parents were from an Ashkenazi Jewish background. I found out the word Ashkenazi translates as from sprinkles of fire, and I have no idea what that means or what it has to do with being Ashkenazi, but that I believe is the literal translation of Ashkenazi. Ashkenazi Jews are Jews basically who migrated into the area around Central Europe and can now be found throughout much of Europe, and much of the rest of the world too. I believe that most Jews who live here in the US are Ashkenazi Jews. A smaller percentage are Sephardi Jews or Sephardic Jews, as they are sometimes called. Um, I have known only a couple of Sephardic Jews, not that many, because where I grew up in New York City, the Jewish neighborhoods where I lived in were predominantly Ashkenazi Jewish neighborhoods, because that's what we have here in the US. Sephardi Judaism, as it has a lot in common, I believe, with Ashkenazi Judaism, but some of the rituals, the commemorations, the foods, the celebrations, um, are different than Ashkenazi Jewish equivalents, but I've always found those to be rather appealing as well. I wish I knew more about you, and I'm sorry that I don't. But if I ever have the opportunity, I will. Unfortunately, where I'm living in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, there is only one Jewish congregation. It is a Reform congregation, and Reform by definition is Ashkenazi. They, they in Sephardi Judaism, there are no divisions, at least not in the same sense. Most Americans think of Judaism as divided between Orthodox, conservative, and Reform. There are also others, including traditional Judaism and Reconstructionist Judaism, which has now renamed itself Reconstructing Judaism. But in Sephardi Judaism, I don't believe that that kind of arrangement exists per se. So it's a very different kind of thing. Sephardi Judaism is the kind of Judaism which developed in the area around Spain. Now, what did I want to talk about? Well, first, I wanted to apologize for the end of my previous video. As you know, many of you know anyway, I am an autistic, and although I have compensated for or even overcome many of my autistic characteristics so that now I probably don't appear to the average person to be autistic, although I think that somebody who is an expert in autism who looked at me might suspect I was, and yes, that person would be correct because I am. But toward the end of the last video, I began speaking rather rapidly, which is something that it has been a lifelong characteristic for me. I also used to stutter quite a bit. The stuttering has mostly gone away, although even that occasionally resurfaces, but mainly not. Mainly, I'm able to talk and communicate pretty much as the average person does, which may be good, may be bad. I have no idea. But I suppose that this video is inspired by the fact that today is Christmas, at least Christmas in Roman Catholicism and in Protestantism. Christmas in Eastern Orthodoxy is celebrated sometime in January because they use a different calendar, or at least some Eastern Orthodox Jews use a different calendar. My understanding is that not all do, but I'm not positive about that. So my knowledge of the Orthodox Christian calendar is very limited, but I believe that they have that there's a big calendrical debate, I think it's called, in Eastern Orthodoxy concerning whether to remain under the Julian calendar or whether to switch to the Gregorian calendar. Now, the argument is for switching to the Gregorian calendar is that, well, in the Western world, that's what most people use. Most people use the Gregorian calendar. The problem with that is that Gregorian is named after Pope Gregory. And obviously, people who are Eastern Orthodox do not accept the popes. And so by opting for the Gregorian calendar, they are in effect electing to use a calendar which was originated within Roman Catholicism, and hence the controversy, which is why you have people in that tradition who argue for and against making that shift. So there you have my little lesson as a sociologist of religion on this Christmas day. Christmas for us, those of us living in the Western world, where I assume most of my listeners are, can be a time of festivity. On the other hand, Christmas for much of the third world is not a time of festivity. There are Palestinians, for example, or Christians. The majority of Palestinians are Muslims, but a smaller percentage are Christians, and an even smaller percentage are Jews. And with the bombings by Israel of Palestine, I can't imagine how their celebration is particularly merry. Maybe it is for some families who have been able to look past the tragedies of this year, of this time of year, when, despite the fact that it is Christmas, Israel continues its bombing campaign against Gaza. Not only Gaza, just today, for example, Israel bombed Syria, killing a general from Iran who was apparently an advisor to the Syrian government. Now, I have no idea who this particular general was, but it's not that I have any special sympathy for people who are contemplating killing people. It's not that I have any special sympathy for people who are engaging in terrorism or who plan to engage in terrorism, but I look at the people who are engaging in these acts right now, the people in the Israeli government. They are, in my view, practicing a form of state terrorism. And to me, that is totally inexcusable. I can't imagine how anybody, say the people who were victims of the Holocaust, the Jews who were victims of the Holocaust in particular, could have ever thought of the fact that their descendants or other Jews who would follow them living right now would be engaging in the same type of behavior that they experienced in Nazi Germany, being killed by the Germans. Now, I'm not going to say that Nazism and Zionism are the same. Obviously, they are not. They are two entirely different ideologies. Their principles are not based on the same values at all. But there is one thing that they have in common, and that is killing. The Nazis killed Jews as well as others like Jehovah's Witnesses, and gypsies and others. And right now, the Israelis are killing Palestinians, some of whom are also Jews. And so this atrocity that is going on right now in Palestine, being committed by the Israelis, seems unimaginable to me. Again, even though I have no relationship directly to Christmas, I always think of this time of year as a time of commemoration, of celebration. In my heart, I realize how many people wait for Christmas. Although, as a Marxist, it saddens me the way Christmas has been as commercialized as it has been. It's been turned into a time where companies basically look forward to it because it is when they make the greatest amount of profits. Christmas has become a time of making profits for corporations. Santa Claus, who was really a relatively recent figure in Christmas, even though he goes back a lot longer, but in terms of being a central figure in the celebration of Christmas, that is relatively recent. But even the mythic figure of Santa Claus has been turned into a symbol of profit. And so when you watch TV commercials or listen to radio commercials, you see these, I guess, for lack of a better term, Santa Claus impersonators who show up and hawk the wares of the company that they are being paid by. Is that the spirit of Christmas? Well, historically, Christmas, of course, was not the date of the birth of Jesus. all the studies that I have read suggest that most likely Jesus was born in the early fall, or for my friends in Britain, in the early autumn, not now in the early winter. And yet, we celebrate his birth in this part of the world, predominantly among Protestants and Roman Catholics, in the early winter. Why? Well, because this date, December 25th, was connected with Saturnalia, a Roman god. Now, I am not going to condemn Christmas for its pagan origins. I am not a Jehovah's Witness or an Armstrongite, both movements which condemn the commemoration of Christmas because of its pagan origins, and because obviously it is not mentioned in the New Testament. So that's not my concern. I will leave that to Christians to debate. But it does fascinate me how, in effect, by Christians, Protestants and Roman Catholics, commemorating Christmas on December 25th, they are literally commemorating a polytheistic system, a system of many gods, not of one god, but of multiple gods. And so, does it surprise me that Christmas has degenerated so much into a time of celebration, not of the lifetime of Jesus, but of capitalism? No, not at all. So, although I certainly respect those who celebrate Christmas, and I know that most Christians, when they're thinking about Christmas, are not thinking about Saturnalia. So the Jehovah's Witness argument against celebrating Christmas because of its connection with Saturnalia, I think is silly. Who cares? The point is, what does it mean to people today? And again, that's when I return to capitalism, a time of gift giving. Well, what is gift giving? Gift giving is capitalism. Gift giving refers to a time during which things are purchased in stores, when stores make a lot of money. Why not instead take that money and send it to people who really need it? People who are living in the third world, whether Palestinians, whether Mexicans, or other people in Latin America, or the people in much of Africa, in much of Asia, in much of the Caribbean, where people literally have nothing. And yet Christmas, and again, I'm not saying this as an attack on Christmas. Far from it. Again, I respect the commemoration of Christmas. But why not turn Christmas into a time of giving to the third world, the developing world, and to the fourth world, which would include, say, in the United States, many poor Native Americans and many poor indigenous people throughout the world. I remember when I was in British Columbia several decades ago, 3 decades ago. I started out on in the city of Vancouver, took a ferry to Vancouver Island, spent about a week and a half with a friend who lived in Victoria, which is on the southern end of Vancouver Island. Then drove up to the northern part of Vancouver Island and took a ferry, a long ferry ride. It was almost like being on an ocean liner, taking a cruise to Prince Rupert. When we were on that journey, going to Prince Rupert, going from Prince Rupert to the Queen Charlotte Islands, throughout my time in British Columbia, I visited various First Nations reserves, which is the name for reservations in Canada. There was one in particular I will never forget. We arrived there expecting to find people who were open to discussing spiritual subjects. Instead, almost everyone we met on that reserve was drunk. And it wasn't only the adults, it was also the children. They were drunk as well. I think sometimes during this time of year, when Christmas is celebrated all over the place, what happened to those people? Those children are now middle-aged or older. Those children I saw who were drunk on that First Nations reserve. Where are they now? What is their situation? Are they working? Are there even jobs to get in that area? I don't know. Those are the people we should be helping. So my personal encouragement is, rather than giving gifts during this time of year to our friends and our families, why not give that money to people like that? The fourth world, people in first world countries who are desperately poor, or to the third world, places like Mexico, places like Palestine, places like Haiti. They are the ones who need the gifts. Generally speaking, I would assume for most people watching this podcast, not our friends and family. I'm not saying that we should not give them gifts. I'm saying that that should not be our focus. That our giving should center on people who are wanting, people who are needy. There are people right now in the third world who are starving to death, people who have nothing. And yet Christmas, the Christmas season, it appears to me, has also become a time of forgetfulness rather than remembrance. Forgetting the actual pain of people that we occasionally see in, say, Save the Children TV commercials. Those commercials are not fiction. There are children like that in the world today. Why, at this time of celebration, a time which in the United States begins on Thanksgiving and continues until next week, which is New Year's? Why, during this time, don't we focus on the needs of people in the third and fourth world? I don't think there is really an answer to that question. We do it because that's what we were taught. That's how we were raised. When I was a little kid, we didn't celebrate Christmas. We barely celebrated Hanukkah. And we stopped celebrating Hanukkah when I was around 12, 13 years old, when my parents thought we had gotten too old for it. Because to my family and to many Jewish families, Hanukkah is a time of giving gifts. It is a time of celebration. So when we would light a candle on the menorah, well, it wasn't really a candle, it was a bulb. But when we would turn the bulb, in effect lighting a candle on the menorah, what excited my sister and myself was not the fact that what Hanukkah represents historically, but the fact that on each day of Hanukkah, we would receive a gift. Now, was that a custom which originated in Judaism? No. It is the adaptation of Christmas to Western Jews. Because obviously there is no Christmas in Judaism. Some Jews actually do celebrate Christmas. I don't know how many, but some do. Nobody that I personally have ever known, but I know that some Jews do celebrate Christmas. And my family just celebrated Hanukkah when I was a kid. But it really had no meaning. There was no discussion about what Hanukkah was. So, same thing I think is true with Christmas. Christmas is a time of the birth of a being who is celebrated by Christians, by Muslims, and by others as a prophetic or messianic being. And yet, instead of appreciating his birth, people instead focus on materialism. So, I guess the purpose of this podcast was to provide some reflections on Christmas coming from a non-Christian, me, someone who has never been a Christian, who has never felt much of an inclination to be one. And yet, of course, as with any American, I have observed Christmas from a distance and occasionally face to face, as with the luncheon today. I've observed all of these people who dress up as Santa Claus in shopping centers and shopping and in major department stores like Macy's in New York. where people sit on this imaginary Santa's lap and tell that Santa what they want. Let me end with this one thing, which is, it's funny, but it's not funny. When I was in about, I don't know, maybe fourth grade, that would be my guess, roughly fourth grade. This was in Queens, in Bayside, Queens, where we lived at that time in New York City. My parents had told me that there was no Santa Claus. So I knew that Santa Claus was fiction. I always knew that. I was never told that there was really a Santa Claus or there was really an Easter Bunny or whatever. I always knew that those were fables. Always. Because it was not a part of my religious tradition. So why not? And yet, I remember one time when I was sitting in the cafeteria, there was a girl, I think she was also in fourth grade, like me, who was sitting opposite me. And this is the curse of my near photographic memory. And I told her that there was no Santa Claus. And she got into an argument with me over it, which you might expect a little kid to do. But eventually, I persuaded her, and she began sobbing. Sobbing as if literally she couldn't stop sobbing. I felt so awful having done that. Why did I do it? I was showing off. That's all. Again, I was a little kid. I was showing off. I knew something that she didn't know. Well, we should not think about showing off. Whether our gifts, whether our homes, whether our cars, whether the things that we have accumulated. Instead, we should focus. We should focus upon people living in the third world and the fourth world instead. And so at that point, I will end this podcast and wish those of you who do celebrate Christmas a Merry Christmas. This has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Maoist Third Worldist Collective. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.